Well, thank you, Shana. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So good to be with you all. It's so cozy and so, I don't know, just great to be together, to worship together and laugh and have fun with Marty and do everything we do. Yeah. So today is January 1st. It's New Year's Day. And of course, as Jews, we got a lot of New Years. They got 4 other New Years. The New Year of the Tree, and there's Rosh Hashanah. There's different New Years. So this we would not call the most important of New Year's days. You know what I mean? It's not the end of the world. A ball comes down in New York. It's not that big a deal. But there is a bit of a lesson in something associated with with New Year's, and that is the idea of making resolutions. And that's a good idea. What is a resolution? Well, what it is, it's kind of taking a look at your life from outside yourself. And you look at yourself and you go, what can I be better with and what can I do better? And, it could be weight loss, it could be this, it could be the other thing. And I would like us to think about the most important or the best New Year's resolution today. I'd like to suggest that we consider the big picture of why we're here and what we're doing and what it's all about. And that's a big subject, but I'd like to focus on Yeshua. I would like to take a look at how fabulous he is from a number of perspectives. And I would like us to distill from what we gain, which I call, for me, it's what I call a big wow. The big wow, And I think by the end of what we have to say today, I think it'll be possible for us to maybe even consider a New Year's resolution that is real and not perfunctory or superficial, but really has resonance in the depth of our souls. So that's the goal for today. So we're talking about Yeshua, and I'd like to, again, keep him first front and center of our thinking and feeling and believing. Of course, that's what we're all about. But the question is why? Again, I'm just kind of reiterating why. What's so terrific? What's the big deal? I'm just expressing it in another way, the subject that we're covering today. So I have a number of things. What's so terrific about Yeshua? So here's the first thing that occurs to me, and it really underlies everything else, and that is that the records, we think he's fabulous because the records that we have of his life and teachings are true. Now that's really important. If when we read the Besorah, or the prophetic passages about him, if there was never a Yeshua, or if he was very different, just a regular guy, not the amazing supernatural person that we encounter, if the records are not reliable, then we're left with the question, why trust in them, and therefore why believe in him? So you get the idea. It's a very important question. It's critically important. And I just want to say that, these are things that have grabbed me and kept me going for now it's 50 years as a follower of Yeshua. And I think these things will be meaningful and are meaningful already to a number of you. So we think of things like the number of ancient manuscripts that when compared together, you get the Bible that we have, the Besorah, the New Covenant Scriptures. There's like 5,800 manuscripts of varying sizes, but all before the printing press and all handwritten. And what scholars do is they compare them together, and that's how you know that what we have was actually written by them. I don't have time to develop that too much, but we had a fun time at Camp Orlador a couple of years ago. I don't know if you guys were there, if any of you were there, but what we did is I wanted the kids to get a concept of how many manuscripts there are compared with other writings from roughly the same period of history, ancient writings, whether it's Socrates, Plato, etc., etc. And so the kids had to count out 5,800 pieces of popcorn. There they were on a big canvas thing, counting, and they had to put them in bags. And by the end, there was lots of popcorn, more popcorn you could ever eat in a week. And then I had them compare it with the number of manuscripts for Socrates, Plato, Euripides, Caesar's Gallic Wars, other books from the time. You know how many pieces of popcorn? 10. 15. All right, so one guy got 600 pieces of popcorn. That won't keep me for a movie. I don't know about you. You know what I'm saying? So, in other words, the distinction was so dramatic, and yet we trust that those books that were written a long time ago were written by the people that they describe, and blah blah blah. But the Besorah has so much more attestation, and that is very meaningful. I like what Luke the physician, who gave us the third of the 4 accounts of Yeshua, called the Gospel of Luke. He was a physician. He's known as the first modern historian, interestingly enough. But I just want to read you his words. Get this. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were, here's the word, get ready for it, eyewitnesses. Handed down by the eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. Now see, what this shows is ancient people weren't dumb, and they weren't unconcerned about facts. They really wanted to know. Listen, if you're going to give your life for Yeshua as a martyr and the Romans are going to come and kill you or throw you to the lions in the Colosseum, you want to be pretty sure that there's good reasons to believe in him, in addition to other things like our own personal experience. So it's a big deal. Ancient people were not unintelligent. They knew what facts were. They cared about truth like us, and they often miss the truth like we do. I mean, who has it all? No one does, of course. But they wanted to live in reality just as we do. Last night at Shabbat dinner, we had a discussion at the table with Dave, myself, Susie, and Serena. And, we were talking about how we have this modern arrogance that assumes that people living a long time ago didn't have the brains to try and think if something was really true objectively, Not true. They were plenty smart. They weren't as technologically advanced, but they were like us in many more ways. And in our modern arrogance, we assume they were unintelligent, uninformed, or unconcerned about reality in the larger sense. Okay, so we get all that. We're going to move on. Oh, but I got one more for you that's so cool. It is so great. One of the things I love about the Besorah. Ready for this? People responded to Yeshua the way you would expect people to respond. And it's recorded as we would expect. What do we find in the Besorah? We find some people saying, wow, he's the guy. I mean, he does these miracles. Who else could do that but the Messiah? But the Gospels record other people saying, nah, he's a phony. He's doing it with smoke and mirrors. Right? That's fantastic. It's fantastic that the gospel writers weren't concerned to write a propaganda piece. They included the sentiments of people who didn't think that he was so great. That is an amazing thing. Now, when we read it, from our perspective, and rightly so, we say, well, the people who were skeptical, there was a lot of confirmation bias there, and they had trouble believing this guy was the Son of God. All right, we get that. But then you have the people who see it as we do. I love that aspect of truth knowing. They were divided, and that rings true because that's exactly what our experience is, isn't it? Don't you find people who think he's the greatest, and other people rationalize the whole thing away and say, yeah, well, I don't know, right? It's just wonderful, absolutely wonderful. All right, let's go on. Why do we even consider how terrific he is? Well, we decided, that the manuscripts that describe him are many, and that the atmosphere and tonality of that story fits reality, fits the way people would actually respond because they're like us and we're like them. Okay, now, here's a big one. Why is Yeshua so terrific? Because he cared about the little guy. Don't you love that about Yeshua? He cared about the little guy. Let me give you a couple of examples. So there was a blind guy sitting on the side of the road. Now let me tell you, I can speak from a little experience, not totally blind, but legally blind. No fun. No fun. You dealt with the cards you got. You deal with it. You hang in there. You find ways to compensate for weaknesses. You make it happen. That's what every blind person or people with any kind of difficulty have done from time immemorial. You work it out, and with God's help, you make it. But to be totally blind, that's another story. That's really tough. So here's this guy sitting along the road. He's a beggar, right? What could it, or we don't know for sure, but he certainly couldn't work easily. And he's sitting there, and Yeshua and his entourage are coming, and he gets word it's Yeshua, and he cries out, "Yeshua, son of David!" Oh yeah. And the people tell him, quiet, what are you making such a racket for? He doesn't stop. He just keeps, "Oh, Yeshua, son of David." Yeshua stops and says, "Wait a minute, we're not going an inch further. I want to see this guy." He goes over to him. He says, "Tell me, sir, what do you want? What would you like?" He says, "Yeshua, I've heard about you, and I heard that you do amazing stuff. I tell you the truth, I am so sick and tired of not being able to work. I can't see family members. I never was able to marry. Who would want to marry a guy like me? Et cetera, et cetera." He says, "I want to see." Yeshua says, "You got it. Be healed." And that fabulous power emanating from the Baranosh, the Son of God, the Son of Man, comes and all of a sudden, his eyes are open, he could see. How happy was he that day? Pretty happy, huh? You better believe it. But he was a little guy. He wasn't a king or a prince or a rich guy. He was what we would call an average guy suffering from a serious affliction. Yeshua cares about the little guy. We love it. We think of we can think of examples of women too, the woman who came up and grabbed his tzitzit on his tzitzit, and she was healed. Lots of examples. I won't take more time. You know what I'm talking about. He cared about the little guy. You got to love him for it, because that's the way he was. What next? Because he was no liar, and because he was no mental case, but it was a supremely integrated, healthy person. Now, this is a big deal. This is a big deal. Yeshua made claims in the Besorah passage that we read today, and we didn't cover all the verses, when he says, "Unless you eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, you won't have a part in me." What an audacious claim. And for a Jew to put it in those categories of eating flesh was so radical and so strange, and intentionally to gain the attention of the people. I think he put it in its starkest terms. But he was also talking about something profoundly important, that participating in him is the key to being part of Olam Haba. That's what he was saying in using this very stark image. Okay? Now, people have said, look, to make such a claim, either you're insane because you have this grandiose view of your importance in the cosmos and in the eternal plan, that people's eternal destinies are dependent on you. And people who believe that are normally suffering from severe mental illness. We think of something called the Jerusalem syndrome. Have I ever talked to you about the Jerusalem syndrome? Jerusalem has a powerful spiritual dynamic operating. And some people who struggle with mental illness will go to Jerusalem and flip out. And this happened to someone who was on a tour that Sue and I took. It was Sue, yeah, Sue, I think she was with me. Anyway, with this happened to a young man, and long story I won't get into, but there's this thing called the Jerusalem syndrome, where people think that they're Yeshua or Miriam of Magdala of Moses. And there's a ward of a hospital in Jerusalem that's dedicated to help these people come back to reality in that sense. And it's a tough thing. People have said that anyone who makes the claims that Yeshua made, he's got to be either nuts, but Yeshua wasn't nuts. That's the point. You can't find a more well-integrated person, more savvy, more sophisticated in the best sense of the word, more continually loving and self-sacrificing, as we'll discuss. It doesn't fit him. And no one who's read the book can come away feeling that this man was out of touch with reality. The other possibility that people have suggested is that he was just a liar. Now, there are religious liars. They show up every once in a while. They usually are doing it for ulterior motives, make money, sell books, whatever. And most people are good. Most religious leaders are good guys, but every once in a while, good women. But every once in a while, you get a liar. So, Yeshua made his claims because he knew he wasn't the Son of God. He told people he was to fool them, and that's the idea. Does that ring true to you this morning? Yes or no? Yes or no? No. Of course not. Are you kidding? Here's the guy who gave the world, the Western world, and demonstrated and gave the highest examples of morality and goodness, who went to his own sacrificial death because there were reasons for that, we'll discuss. He was no liar. And no one who's read the book could possibly conclude that. But the net result is that he's the guy who said who he was. And when we look at his character and the kind of person he is, we see he's a really well put together person. There's no way to assign to him either mental imbalance or being a liar. And there's so many great examples. I'll give you one or two. So, Yeshua is challenged. This is the end of his life, toward the end of his life, and his antagonists were coming hard at him, and they wanted to trick him. So they asked him this question. Master, we know, you teach the truth. Let me ask you, is it right to pay taxes to Caesar? Now, you think that's an innocent question? It wasn't an innocent question. It was intended to trip him up in this way. At that time, the Jewish people were very polarized in terms of their attitude toward the Romans. And there were people who felt, the Romans, they're in charge and we want to do what they ask us to do. And then there were a lot of people who felt that, no, we got to get rid of these Romans. They're pagans and they're acting, we're an occupied people and we don't like that one bit. So if he were to answer, it's right to pay taxes, then his enemies would have said, see, he's in collaboration with the Romans. How could the Messiah be a collaborator with the Romans? You can't win if you give that answer. But what if he were to say, no, it's not right to give taxes to the Romans? How would his antagonists respond then? He would say, let's talk to the governor. You sound to me like you're trying to start an insurrection. You're hitting the Romans where they're real sensitive. Don't pay tax to them. Let's get them arrested and taken care of, you see? So what did he do instead of answering? He did the coolest, most wise thing. First of all, he said, show me a denarius. In other words, they had to produce it. And that was a very effective rhetorical move. You show me. You carry the image with the king's, with the emperor's imprint on it. You show it to me. That'll say something about where you're at. Very clever. And so he shows his smarts, his cleverness, his intelligence, all for good purposes. And then we'll just leave this section with this. Read the Beatitudes and tell me you're not dealing with a magnificent person, a moral teacher. He's much more than a moral teacher, but he was a moral teacher. Tell me that you're dealing with someone who isn't truly great. Just listen. You've heard these before, but just listen. We're not going to comment on them. I just want you to hear them, okay? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Friends, these are the words that have resounded and reverberated through the centuries and have turned wicked people to good and made horrible societies better and relatively good societies even better. These are not the words of a person who is out of touch. These are the words of holiness coming from Yeshua to the world from his Abba in heaven. Okay, number 4. Why are we so crazy about Yeshua? What's so great about him? The bird's eye view, we're stepping back. Number 4, because he is so unique in Yeshua, in Israel's history. I mean, he tells people, your sins are forgiven. Again, person who wants to dismiss that, well, Yeshua was crazy. He had who could forgive sins? Only God can. Duh, yeah. That's right. He's claiming the prerogatives of deity as the servant of the Lord, the Son of Man who represents the Father on this earth because he's connected with the Father. There's no one like him in history. There's no one like him among religious leaders. You just don't find it. He's a unique Jew, a unique guy. And we could talk about many other things, but in the interest of time, I'm going to skip some of the other specifics that I have on this point. So let me move on to point 5 here. Because he liked and cared about kids, that's why we think he's so terrific. He liked them. The parents brought the little ones to him, and at one point, and maybe there were other times, but his Talmidim, his disciples, said, get the kids out of here. We got things to do. We got a lot of villages to get to. We got a timetable. Sorry, lady, we just can't, we just can't see the kids right now. What did Yeshua say? Do you recall? Does anyone recall? Can you quote him? Let the little children come to me. And so they came, and he put his hands on their kepis, and he prayed a blessing on them, just like we do in his name earlier in the service. You got to like him for that. We're not talking about some high-flung leader who, in his lofty greatness, doesn't step into our world and care about kids, the vulnerable of the society. The kids, most vulnerable. And so that's really terrific. Number 6, because he was so properly tough on leaders who cared more about institution building and asserting control than about people. You got to love him for this. Yeshua, who is the Lord of all, I mean, he is the one who's going to come again and rule it all. He had very little patience for leaders who were detached and uncaring. And so we could read a little bit of this from Matthew 23. And I'll just read it and won't comment much. But then Yeshua said to the crowds and to his disciples, the teachers of the Torah and the Pirushim sit in Moses' seat, but you must be careful to do everything they tell you. Okay, there's a certain legitimacy to their leadership. Moses' seat was a particular chair, actually, in the synagogue, which was a symbol of the leadership in the community. Okay, right. Their halakhic pronouncements, take them seriously. All good. So, do what they ask you to do, but don't do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders. But they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. And you love him for it. And you love him because he didn't put up with self-centered leadership. And, Ruach, we try, and we have a lot of leaders in the congregation. Everyone helps out, and everyone tries to dig in. And, if you got to take out the garbage, you take out the garbage. You don't say, that's beneath me. It's not the way we do it around here. But that's only because we're trying to follow his example. And you got to love him for it, because he didn't put up with people who were that way. Okay, number 8, because his love was demonstrated by self-sacrifice. Because his love was demonstrated by self-sacrifice. And this is one of the things about him that grabs our hearts more than anything. It's one thing to be a leader. It's another thing to be seen as sacrificing something about oneself for the sake of the people. And that is the quintessence of what Yeshua is all about. At Gethsemane, you recall, the human and the divine kind of mixed in Yeshua in an inscrutable combination, but We see him somewhat scared and reluctant because he knew what was coming, his own crucifixion. And so at Gethsemane, he says, Father, take this cup away from me, but nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. And it was a tough moment. And one of the Gospels mentions that he sweat as if drops of blood. And I understand that a morbid sweat at times of intense pressure can actually produce that kind of, literally produce a kind of blood-soaked sweat, if you will. Whether it's metaphoric or actual, doesn't matter. You get the picture. He was really suffering because he knew what was coming, because crucifixion was intensely painful, and he knew that that's what was coming his way. And why did he do it? He did it not just as an example of self-sacrifice for us to emulate. We can never emulate that, but not just as an example of a high moral value. He did it because there's something about the human race which needed to be corrected and needed to be atoned for, like Yom Kippur, and he was the only one who had the power to do it, and he did it. And you got to love him for it, because when you look deeply at your own heart, you know, because you know your own thought world, you're not all that great, nor am I. And I'm not talking about going around with some terrible inferiority complex. It's not that. It's just an honest recognition that we do sin. And that's Jewish tradition, muted in modern times by the secular influences on Judaism, but nonetheless, it's the real picture. And in Christianity, of course, too. And we know. And he demonstrated that self-sacrifice of being willing to be even temporarily separated from God. And that's why he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Why have you left me alone? Imagine, he walked in intimacy with his Father from before creation was creation, forever, and now God turns his face and says, no, it's necessary, you have to go through this. And he volunteered for it. Wow, you got to love him for that. Number 9, because his power was demonstrably so real. And again, we get back to point 1 here a little bit. His resurrection is a matter of historical record that can be defended on real evidential grounds, and it really happened. His power, he rose from the dead. His power was so great, and just wait until he comes back again. We haven't seen anything yet, and we love him for it, and we're glad for it, and we love Hashem for it. And last, because he felt the human condition so deeply. And I'll just appeal to the shortest verse in the entire Bible. This is at the time when Lazarus in the English version, when he had died, and everyone's crying outside the tomb, and Yeshua experiences this, and people have wondered, why did he cry if he knew what he was going to do? He was going to raise him from the dead. I believe the reason he cried is because he was entering into the pathos of the human condition in the face of death, when all the mourners, you'd have professional mourners and flute players and whatnot, and you'd have visitors, and you would have the family members, the 2 sisters, and they're crying and feeling hopeless, and he just enters into the fullness of the human experience, and with all of that tragedy and pathos, and instead of just saying to himself or saying to anyone else, hey, everybody, I got this, don't worry, don't be sad. He enters into the sadness, and he weeps along with everybody else. You got to love him for it. You got to love him for it. So what's the conclusion of all this? What is the conclusion? A New Year's resolution. I'm going to read a resolution that I'm hoping that we can make and that you can make. But I want to read it to you first, so that when we go through it again, if you feel it's something you can and want to enter into, you can. I'm not into manipulating anybody here into some superficial anything. In light of all we've said, consider this. This year, I want to see, to feel, to understand, and to follow the greatest Jew who ever lived, the unique one, Messiah Yeshua. I want to walk with the God of Israel through him, and with the help of his Ruach, his Spirit, I want to do better this year than last year. Thank you, Avinu, for hearing my heartfelt prayers. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this little by little, and if you feel convicted in your heart to, and you want this to be your New Year's resolution, then say the words along with me. I'll go slowly. This year, I want to see, to feel, to understand. And to follow the greatest Jew who ever lived. The unique one, Messiah Yeshua. I want to walk with the God of Israel through him, and with the help of his Ruach, his Spirit, I want to do better this year than last year. Thank you, Avinu, for hearing my heartfelt prayer. Thank you, Avinu, for hearing my heartfelt prayer. May this be a fabulous year for you and for our entire community. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.